MMR is one where I think the problem was exacerbated by the feeling in the Department of Health that you had to say there is absolutely no risk from MMR. I frankly think that even if you knew there was absolutely no risk, it would have been more expedient to say there's a negligible risk, a tiny risk of 1 in a couple of 100,000. In fact, what you should have said, and what I was in the habit of saying, and what I got a phone call from the head of the Health Protection Agency to say I must stop saying it, was there is no evidence that there is anything to worry about. But it's not rulable out that at the level of 1 in a few 100,000, there could be adverse effects. What you can say for sure, however, is that if your kid gets measles, there's a 1 chance in 1,000 of very serious neurological damage. So the risk of not having the kid vaccinated may be infinitely, the risk of having him vaccinated may be 0 compared to the risk of not having him vaccinated, him or her, but at very worst, it's 100 times better to have them vaccinated. Department of Health, on the other hand, just had to insist it's absolutely safe, and people hearing that and forgetting that measles was something that was nasty, we have the irrationality that has us many more measles cases and borderline mini-epidemic. And some of the follies beg a belief. One of my friends had his child invited to a measles party where one of the children had measles and the other mothers were bringing their children so that they could naturally get vaccinated by being in contact with someone with measles. I mean, this is an idiocy that beggars belief. But that's what can happen if you don't think not only about trying to do the right thing, but the effective and honest way to do it. And when I was rung and told I must shut up, we had an argument and I went on doing it as I'm doing now. I'll tell you one last anecdote because I think it reflects very well on DEFRA, which used to be a department that had some troubles with science sometimes. So badgers and bovine TB. Again, several years back, and again, it's John Krebs was put in charge of making recommendations about what best to do. We've killed a hell of a lot of badgers over the years in the West Country and never eradicated TB there. And very, very good and long and searching inquiry with relevant people in disease dynamics and badger and behavioural ecologists, statisticians, decided it could be effective, but you would have to have a continuing final solution kind of thing. The number of badgers you would have to kill in the first instance is probably in the neighbourhood of 50,000, and you'd have to keep doing it. Short of that, just trying to hit hotspots and eradicate badgers, you're more likely to make things worse than better. And this was controversial and not everybody happy with it, but it's the policy we've been pursuing, not going all out for big kill. On the other hand, the whole debate is a bit coloured by, from the farmer's point of view, if they do the things that they could alternatively do of keeping badgers and cattle more effectively apart, and there are various things you can do, it will cost the farmers, whereas if DEFRA is killing the badgers, it doesn't cost the farmers. And you may say, if you want to get more broad spectrum on it, maybe the most effective thing is to do an analysis in which you make the farmers pay for either killing badgers or changing farm. Or better still, you put some of the legitimate farm subsidies into helping do the protective measures. Be that as it may, for reason which none of us who have been involved in this fully understand, more recently, a different study was put together just one afternoon with 5 people who didn't include a really good disease dynamics person or a statistician, and which appears to have misunderstood the statistics, because the earlier thing had David Cox, probably the best practical statistician in the world in his generation, and Christine Donnelly and others, and it recommended the big kill. And that was then this interesting inversion of the science advice coming to the department being at odds with the thing that informed science would say. And I think it is hugely to DEFRA's credit that they bit that bullet and took the consensual advice from the larger and more expert community and are not doing the big kill on badgers. And I think that's a particularly pleasing and tricky example because it's an inversion of the scientists telling them the right thing and the politicians interfering. It's the one subset of scientists telling them the wrong thing and the department having some real wisdom. So I could go on and on about these things, but I think I should stop now. I just want to conclude with two statements. One is the role of outsiders brought in and insiders is a tricky and not easy one because you have to be effective, you have to operate in a very different tribal culture in the civil service. Worthy people, just like the world of science and academia, good people and bad people, well-intentioned people and careerist people, but it's a different culture. And you have to be and be seen to be an independent voice when there are often pressures on you, if you want to be continually effective, to go along with the politically expedient. The guidelines help because they can be brandished, as I've explained to you on occasion they have been effectively, but it's going to take a generation to embed them in the civil service if they ever are. And simply saying we'll do these things anyhow, the Bush administration is a perfect example of how they can be perverted if you really want to. Karl Rove, who is the brilliantly evil person who advised Bush, really bright person, is for one thing, he's the person who gave us the word climate change, because global warming actually is saying something, whereas climate change, immediately, the climate's always changed. He is always also the person who insisted at the White House, always, whatever you say we're being guided by sound science. You know, take all the independent scientists out of the agencies, replace them with political hacks, do what you will, but all the time you say we're doing sound science. Again, much easier said than done. So what I've tried to do is give a sense, some of it in the abstract, some of it in the concrete, some of it with chosen illustrations about science advice and policy making. And it's not, I actually found Tony Blair wonderful to work with. I had difficulty adjusting to the way the administration went off the rails towards the end, because he said what are going to be my closing words. He says the fundamental distinction in this science advice and policy making is between a process which tells us the facts, and I would interpolate, acknowledging the uncertainties in an open way, and then we make a judgment. Science advice leads to the policy making. There's a choice between that and a process where a priori judgments effectively constrain scientific research. Let us know the facts, then make the judgment how we use or act on them. I want to reach my judgments after I have the facts, not before. And this lecture has been about the difficulties in following this exemplary process.